Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a certified paralegal here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. Today we're just going to be providing another installment into our series on the Federalist Papers, getting on to number 5, yet another one written by Mr. John Jay, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that just yet. And of course, it's important to read through these documents as per stated by late and great Justice Antonin Scalia. These provide the context and the understanding that the founders have when drafting, preparing, and ultimately installing the U.S. Constitution. If you want to fully understand the U.S. Constitution, you have to understand what took place and what was argued in the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers. All right, before we get into that, though, I'm excited to announce I've published my first novel titled Lawfare, Abolish the American Bar Association. If you're curious about the foundational reasons for the Calhoun School of Law, as well as who the deep state actually is, go ahead and pick up a copy of the novel off of Amazon. It's available in digital, paperback, or hardcover. It explains at great detail how the titular organization, the American Bar Association, is best fitting of the title deep state rather than these other agencies, corporations, or entities that we tend to correlate or give that title. So once again, if you're curious in having those questions answered, pick up a copy of the novel off of Amazon. Excellent. So let's go ahead, get to number 5. Yes, I was correct. It is written by Mr. John Jay himself. Now, the more I read about Jay, the more I think he was a malevolent actor. I don't think maleficent, I think that's a word. Well, anyway, malevolent, malicious, whatever word you would like to say when regarding John Jay, just because in these past 3 or 4 papers, he is either malevolent or very incompetent when it comes to why the Revolutionary War was fought in the first place and why the War for American Independence was waged. He's basically advocating for monarchy and protectionism and mercantilism, the very things that the Revolution was fought to escape. He's advocating to be reinstalled via the U.S. Constitution. So let's see if he rectifies himself at all, redeems himself in number 5. Number 5 is titled Concerning Dangers from Foreign Force and Influence Continued. This is the fourth one, third or fourth document that he's going on this topic. He's really concerned about safety, and we ought to remember that the founders, again, the whole purpose of fighting the revolution wasn't to be safe, wasn't to be secure. If they wanted to be that, they could have just remained under the crown, under the submission and subjugation of the crown. No, they fought for, as proclaimed in the U.S. Declaration of Independence and echoed in the Articles of the Confederation and U.S. Constitution, to secure the God-given inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property / happiness. Nowhere does it say safety or security. So John Jay, in comparison to the other founders, has his priorities a little misaligned. Number 5, Concerning Dangers from Foreign Force and Influence Continued, written by John Jay, authored in the Independent Journal, November 10th, 1787. So he's talking to the people of the state of New York, but of course, given that this was the debate, the publicized debate surrounding the U.S. Constitution, it was propagated to the other 12 states to consider when ratifying or making the argument to ratify the U.S. Constitution, which ultimately ended in the Anti-Federalists actually winning the debate as per the terms outlined in the Articles of Confederation. So to the people of the state of New York, Queen Anne, in her letter of the 1st July 1706 to the Scotch Parliament, makes some observations on the importance of the union then forming between England and Scotland, which merit our attention. I shall present the public with 1 or 2 extracts from it. An entire and perfect union will be the solid foundation of lasting peace. It will secure your religion, liberty, and property, remove the animosities amongst yourselves and the jealousies and differences betwixt our 2 kingdoms. It must increase your strength, riches, and trade, and by this union, the whole island, being joined in affection and free from all apprehensions of different interest, will be enabled to resist all its enemies. We most earnestly recommend to you calmness and unanimity in this great and weighty affair, that the union may be brought to a happy conclusion, being the only effectual way to secure our present and future happiness, and disappoint the designs of our and your enemies, who will doubtless on this occasion use their utmost endeavors to prevent or delay this union. And there's nothing wrong with having a union. The problem is when you start to conflate mistakenly, perhaps intentionally, incorrectly I should say, conflate this idea of a union and the idea of a nation. Being a nation In this circumstance, the Scottish would have to surrender their Scottish heritage, or the British would have to surrender the British heritage. In a union, you don't have to surrender either. You're making a promise, not even a legally binding swearing contract, nothing of that sort. You're making a promise that if in times of danger, either against England or against Scotland, the other would come to the aid of the other. Not that the Scottish have to become British, or that the British have to become Scottish, or that they conglomerate and diffuse into this abomination of the two that foundationally are incongruent. That the Scottish have principles of governance with which the English thoroughly disagree, that the English government cannot coexist with. So to have a union between the two, that's perfectly fine. But whenever you try to form a nation, which is ultimately what happened between the British and the Scots, that's when disarray comes about. So having a union, just fine. But what John Jay is advocating for here is a nation, and forcing all of these different states, trying to force 50 states in the modern context to come under this singular identity with mixed principles, mixed ideas of how governance ought to be levied. You're going to have turmoil. You're going to have, well, a domestic war. You're going to have conflict internally. But if you have a union, just a promise to come to the aid of another in times of trouble, not surrendering sovereignty, not surrendering identity, like what's happened under the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution, de jure, not de facto. So as per the contract, that's how it's supposed to be. Is that how it is as a matter of fact? No. But as per the terms outlined in the U.S. Constitution, none of the states surrendered their statehood, their nationhood, their countryhood, whatever term you'd like to use, didn't surrender their sovereign identity, didn't surrender their sovereignty, which is why they all have their own constitutions and they all have their own 3 branches of governance: legislative, judicial, and executive. It was remarked in the preceding paper that weakness and divisions at home would invite dangers from abroad, and that nothing would tend more to secure us from them than union, strength, and good government within ourselves. That doesn't have to be a problem. Let them govern at the individual state levels, and then when times of trouble come along, threatening against one of the other states, for their own benefit, would find it advantageous to go and defend that other state. This is perfectly personified in events just recently preceding this document's publication, whether that be the American Revolution, or when observing the practices of the American Indian tribes. It was only when they came under the Iroquois nation, well, they called it a nation, but it was realistically a union. It was a bond between very unique and individual tribes, saying, hey, we've got these invaders, these Europeans, these colonizers coming to our land trying to take over. We should, for the betterment of each tribe, come together with our armaments and try to fight them off. And if they had done that sooner, like a decade sooner, they probably would have won. So I agree in that union is good. It provides a stronger front against invading enemies. But you do not need to form a nation. You do not need to surrender your sovereignty. I, as a Texian, do not need to surrender my Texianness in order to effectively combat an invasion that's being levied against a state like Tennessee, like Mississippi. Another perfect example, Texas wasn't even a part of the Union yet, and multiple individuals, specifically from Tennessee, a completely unique, sovereign, individual state, came to the aid of Texas. Not even necessarily for the benefit of Texas, but because if Texas was overrun, if Texas was subverted, Tennessee was absolutely going to be next. There are so many examples in history where unique and sovereign nations bonded together, under temporary circumstances, by the way, to mitigate or to repel any invasion on one of their allied states. And that nothing would tend more to secure us. See, we just read through that. This subject is copious and cannot easily be exhausted. Yes, it can. The history of Great Britain is the one with which we are in general the best acquainted, and it gives us many useful lessons. Yeah, like what not to do. We may profit by their experience without paying the price which it costs them. Although it seems obvious to common sense that the people of such an island should be but one nation, that's not common sense. Why? Why is that common sense? Explain to me why every individual on that island in Europe has to surrender their identity for their common defense. How does that make any sense at all? Why is that commonly sensical? Yet we find that they were for ages divided into three. I wonder why. Probably because each island, each individual country had different needs, had different reasons for governing in their individual and unique ways. And that those three were almost constantly embroiled in quarrels and wars with one another. Yeah, that's what happens every single time. Notwithstanding their true interest with respect to the continental nations was really the same, yet by the arts and policy and practices of those nations, their mutual jealousies were perpetually kept inflamed, because one nation in particular, Britain, wanted to make everybody else on that island British. If Britain had kept to the Britain land, or to the British land, and the Irish kept to the Irish, which they did, for the most part, and the Scottish kept to the Scots, or kept to Scotland, and the Wales kept to Wales, these problems wouldn't have happened. But because one nation in particular really wanted the other nations to be just like them, that's when the other nations resisted, rightfully, to maintain their identity, to maintain their liberty and sovereignty. Yet by the arts and policy and practices of those nations, their mutual jealousies were perpetually kept inflamed, and for a long series of years, they were far more inconvenient and troublesome than they were useful in assisting to each other. Should the people of America, which does not exist, they're only the people of the states. America is a collection of continents. You are a citizen of your state, and your state is a member to the United States of America. You are not a citizen of the United States, just like you're not a citizen of the United Nations. You're not a citizen of any union. A union cannot have citizens. It is a collective of states, a collective of nations, a collective of countries. And you're a citizen of those individual states, individual nations, individual countries, but you cannot be a citizen of the Union. Divide themselves into 3 or 4 nations, confederacies, not nations. Would not the same thing happen? No. Would not similar jealousies arise and be in like manner cherished? No, because the entire point of the confederacies were to maintain their sovereignties, which means New England can do whatever New England wants to do, and the Southern Confederacies could do whatever they wanted to do, and then when times of trouble came upon any of the confederacies would join together to repel the invasion, not for the invaded confederation's specific sake, but for the sake of their own, because if one confederacy falls, the next one is the target. So, for the sake of your own confederation, go and defend these neighboring confederacies. It's just so simple and so historically backed, but John Jay is either ignorant of it, negligent to it, or maliciously conniving and misrepresenting history. Would not similar jealousies arise and be in like manner cherished? Instead of their being joined in affection and free from all apprehension of different interests, envy and jealousy would soon extinguish confidence in affection, and the partial interests of such confederacy, instead of the general interests of all America, would be the only sub-objects of their policy and pursuits. So he's basically saying, hey, before we have before we have these unique and sovereign confederacies or individual states, let's just go ahead and rid these states of their individual identities so that way we avoid this turmoil here. Let's just make everybody think the same now so we don't have to force it on everybody later down the road, like what Great Britain was trying to do with Scotland, with Wales, and with the Irish. That's what John Jay's saying here. He's saying, hey, let's just go ahead and dissolve the states right now. Let's go ahead and get rid of the sovereignty principle that we fought for in the Revolutionary War now, so that way we don't have to get rid of it by force later down the road. Let's just get rid of sovereignty now. Yeah, it's advocating openly for monarchy, for protectionism, for mercantilism. Maybe that's why he's one of the fewer referenced authors in history. Hence, like most other bordering nations, they would always be either involved in disputes at war or live in the constant apprehension of them. No, that's the whole purpose of the confederacy, so you can govern your confederacy how you wish and leave the other confederacies alone, except when one of the other confederacies, or one of the other confederations, I should say, is being invaded. Then, of course, the confederations bond together, repel the invasion, and then go back to their separate corners. It's a temporary contract, a temporary alliance, for the sake of your own confederation. The most sanguine advocates for 3 or 4 confederacies cannot reasonably suppose that they would long remain exactly on an equal footing in point of strength, even if it was possible to form them so at first. It is totally possible, because that's exactly what happened. But admitting that to be practicable, yet what human contrivance can secure the continuance of such equality, independent of those local circumstances which tend to beget and increase power in one part and to impede its progress in another, we must advert to the effects of that superior policy and good management which would probably distinguish the government of one above the rest, and by which their relative equality and strength and consideration would be destroyed. For it cannot be presumed that the same degree of sound policy, prudence, and foresight would uniformly be observed by each of these confederacies for a long succession of years. So that's exactly what he's saying. He's saying, well, one of these confederations, one of these 3 or 4 confederations is naturally going to grow this want and desire to spread into the other confederations and gain control of their governments. So let's just get rid of them all right now and form a unitary body. Let's just surrender the idea of the principle of sovereignty, of liberty, of unique identity in each of these states, and let's just all go ahead, get rid of this idea so we don't have to deal with the turmoil later down the road. Surrender your freedom now, surrender your sovereignty now, so that way we can, at the start, all be under this efficient and efficient and optimized, as John Jay would prefer to say, government. All that means, all that is a euphemism for, is we're going to micromanage every single facet of your life. We're going to regulate every bit of trade that you do. Your business is going to be owned by the government, not because we hate you, but because it's for your safety. It's for your security. Yeah. He's openly advocating for communism, or what would be protectionism and mercantilism at this time. Whenever and from whatever causes it might happen, and happen it would, that any one of these nations or confederacies should rise on the scale of political importance much above the degree of her neighbors, he's presuming this is going to happen. That moment would those neighbors behold her with envy and with fear, but those passions would lead them to countenance, if not to promote, whatever might promise to diminish her importance, and would also restrain them from measures calculated to advance or even to secure her prosperity. Much time would not be necessary to enable her to discern these unfriendly dispositions. She would soon begin not only to lose confidence in her neighbors, but also to feel a disposition equally unfavorable to them. Distrust naturally creates distrust, and by nothing is goodwill and kind conduct more speedily changed than by invidious jealousies and uncandid imputations, whether expressed or implied. The North is generally the region of strength. Gag me with a spoon. And many local circumstances render it probable that the most northern of the proposed confederacies would, at a period not very distant, be unquestionably more formidable than any of the others. No sooner would this become evident than the northern hive would excite the same ideas and sensations in the more southern parts of America, which it formerly did in the southern parts of Europe, nor does it appear to be a rash conjecture that its young swarms might often be tempted to gather honey in the more blooming fields and milder air of their luxurious and more delicate neighbors. Well, guess what, John Jay? Even under this document that you're advocating for, that still happened. There was still a big push by the northern states against the southern states to completely control their governance. So guess what? Your idea of coming together under this singular nation didn't work. Shocker, big surprise. It's almost like the Anti-Federalists told you that that very thing was going to happen, and it happened. The historical record makes absolutely certain when you force people under a singular identity, they are going to revolt. They are going to rebel. They are going to try at the best effort to maintain their identity, to maintain their sovereignty. And it's interesting that he says the North is going to be the monster, or the more powerful and what would that be? The stronger, we'll just say, the stronger and more politically influential sphere, because it was in fact the South, the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America, when they seceded, could have won the War of Northern Aggression, the war between the states, whatever you'd like to call it. In the first battle, they could have marched directly to Washington, D.C. and utterly destroyed the Northern government, the Union. But they didn't. Why? Because they fulfilled their purpose with that first battle. The first battle was, back off, we're going to maintain our governance. If you don't back off, we're just going to defend. What ultimately happened is Robert E. Lee surrendered without permission from the President of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis, which thoroughly Enraged, Davis, nonetheless. But that's just all to say, it's interesting that Jay predicted that the North would be the stronger and more politically influential, yet it was the South, the Confederate States of America, that very easily, within the first battle, could have won the physical conflict that was inevitably going to happen under the U.S. Constitution. And it was only because that Lee surrendered the Confederate States of America that the South, in quotes, lost. Remember, the South won over half of the battles, won the first, the last battle, yet were significantly undermanned and were significantly technologically disadvantaged. And they still won more battles. They still won the first and last battle of the war between the states. So he predicted it would be the North. The South was actually the more fervent power, I should say. They who well consider the history, and just take that for note. He's saying here, when the North, because he's predicting the North is going to be the stronger one, when the North has these ambitions, that they would win. When the South could have won, they showed no ambition of taking over the other confederation, of taking over the Union. So no, it's not commonsensical, it's not innate, it's not natural to believe that humans, whenever they get that ambitious drive, or whenever they get that taste for power, for total empire, that they actually fulfill those dreams, because the South, the Confederate States of America, showed restraint, didn't conquer Washington, just went back, defended their borders. Very well could have, but didn't. They who well consider the history of similar divisions and confederacies will find abundant reason to apprehend that those in contemplation would in no other sense be neighbors than as they would be borderers. The exact opposite is true. That they would neither love nor trust one another. Still not true, but on the contrary would be a prey to discord, jealousy, and mutual injuries. Still not true. In short, that they would place us exactly in the situations in which some nations doubtless wish to see us, viz. Formidable only to each other. From these considerations, it appears that those gentlemen are greatly mistaken who suppose that alliances offensive and defensive might be formed between these confederacies and would produce that combination and union of wills, of arms, and resources which would be necessary to put and keep them in a formidable state of defense against foreign enemies. The irony is they weren't wrong at all. In fact, they were right. They hit the nail on the head. You are the one in the wrong, John Jay. When did the independent states, into which Britain and Spain were formerly divided, combine in such alliance or unite their forces against a foreign enemy? Well, it's probably because Britain was trying to take over Spain 24/7. That Spain said, you know what? I don't feel like defending this country, this nation, that has felt this extreme urge to colonize all of Europe. That's probably why Spain didn't come to the aid of Britain. The proposed confederacy, I think that's... Don't quote me on that. I'll double check the historical record. Make sure to post any corrections in the description of this video if I got that incorrect. I think I'm remembering correctly. The proposed confederacies will be distinct nations. Each of them would have its, not nations, they would be confederacies. It can't be a confederacy and a nation at the same time. They're two completely different words. Each of them would have its commerce with foreigners to regulate by distinct treaties, and as their productions and commodities are different and proper for different markets, so would those treaties be essentially different. Different commercial concerns must create different interests, and of course different degrees of political attachment to and connection with different foreign nations. Hence, it might and probably would happen that the foreign nation with whom the Southern Confederacy might be at war would be the one with whom the Northern Confederacy would be the most desirous of preserving peace and friendship. An alliance so contrary to their immediate interest would not therefore be easy to form, nor, if formed, would it be observed and fulfilled with perfect good faith. Nay, it is far more probable that in America, which does not exist, as in Europe, neighboring nations acting under the impulse of opposite interests and unfriendly passions would frequently be found taking different sides. Considering our distance from Europe, it would be more natural for these confederacies to apprehend danger from one another than from distant nations, and therefore that each of them should be more desirous to guard against the others by the aid of foreign alliances than to guard against foreign dangers by alliances between themselves. And here let us not forget how much more easy it is to receive foreign fleets into our ports and foreign enemies into our country. Not a country, a confederacy. Then it is to persuade or compel them to depart. How many conquests did the Romans and others make in the characters of allies, and what innovations did they, under the same character, introduce into the governments of those whom they pretended to protect? Let candid men judge then whether the division of America into any given number of independent sovereignties would tend to secure us against the hostilities and improper interference of foreign nations. Once again, the main priority, there's number 6, the main priority of the revolution, of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, of the U.S. Constitution, of the Articles of the Confederation, wasn't to secure, wasn't to provide safety, it was to pursue the inalienable God-given rights to life, liberty, and property, or happiness. So John Jay's, no wonder he's getting this all backwards, either by ignorance or malevolence, because his priorities are shifted. The founders, in pretty vast agreement and congruence, agreed that liberty, life, and pursuit of property were the ultimate goals. It wasn't safety. It wasn't providing security. I think it was Thomas Jefferson. I've already said this in a couple of lectures. If you want safety and you're willing to surrender even a smidge of freedom for it, you're going to get neither safety or liberty, and you deserve neither. You have to be free. The only security you can have is securing your own liberty. So what is the benefit of going to a different nation's aid, a different confederacy's aid? Well, if that confederacy falls, you can bet your bottom dollar that you're the next confederacy in the target, that the sights are now set on you whenever that first one falls. So the historical record shows actually the opposite of what John Jay is trying to argue, that in fact, when you try to force everyone under the same identity, under the same governance, under the same militial order, or militaristic order, that's when you have these jealousies arise. That's when you have these mumblings in the military, what would be a unified army, saying, maybe we should let the invaders take over California because California's trying to be monopolize, or has tried to monopolize and control how the other states organize and govern themselves. So let's let the invaders take over California, clear it out, and then we'll go in and clear out the invaders from California. No. Let California do what California wants to do. Don't let it encroach on any of the other state governments. Let Texas do what it wants to do. Let Oregon do what it wants to do. Let New Jersey do what it wants to do. And then whenever any threat comes up against any of the states, they bond together, repel the invasion, and then go back to their separate corners. That's how you prevent jealousies. That's how you prevent these mumblings and these rumors that we're going to subvert, we're going to sabotage these states that are obviously trying to gain more centralized authority through the federal government. Do the opposite of what John Jay is advocating here, and you reduce the problems that he is trying to prevent. So hopefully you enjoyed this information. Hopefully I provided enough historical proof, articulated well enough. If you have any questions about the content of Federalist Paper number 5, I think is what it was. Let me scroll back up to the top just to confirm. Don't want to get the numbers wrong. Yep, number 5. If you have any questions on that information, if you'd like more historical proof to prove my case or my argument absolutely certain, go ahead and post about that in the comments. If you have any topics you'd like me to cover in a future lecture. For the time being, the plan is just continue through these Federalist Papers, continue making lectures on the Federalist Papers, because as I said at the beginning, according to late and great Justice Antonin Scalia, one of the deficiencies of the legal education system is that the Federalist Papers actually aren't taught. And if you want to really understand the verbiage, the syntax, and the structure of governance that the founders were preparing and providing in the U.S. Constitution, realistically, you need to read through the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers to truly understand the dictionary, the vocabulary, the understandings, and the intents that the founders had when they were preparing the U.S. Constitution. And understanding the U.S. Constitution is, of course, required. It is imperative to know whenever the ever-growing hostile lawfare state comes to harass you, your family, or your property, because it's not a matter of if, but when that state comes to harass you, your family, or your property, then I want you to be thoroughly equipped, thoroughly capable, thoroughly learned to defend against any barrages waged and levied by that state. So once again, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments, because the entire point of the Calhoun School of Law and these lectures being posted for free on rumble.com, I like to say this in every lecture, is for your benefit. And I would rather serve that purpose exceptionally than insufficiently. So last time, I promise, if you have any questions, any topics you'd like me to cover in the future, please post them in the comments. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a certified paralegal here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law, bringing you a lot of information Plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. The next lecture is probably just going to be another installment on the Federalist Papers, going on to number 6, unless an emergency topic comes up that I'll cover interim or in between. That would be to your benefit to know. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. I'll do my best to make the next lecture as informative and entertaining as this one, if not more so. I know it's kind of hard going through these, drudging through just endless Federalist Papers, but I promise you it will be to your benefit understanding thoroughly the U.S. Constitution, the intents, the purposes, and the vocabulary whenever you have to use it and utilize it in defense of your liberties, of your rights. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and until that next lecture, I bid you all a wonderful and happy farewell.